All right, with that, I'm going to turn over to our two superstars today, both Tim and Jack. So I'll let you guys come up here and take the stage, and I'm going to go sit and relax for a change. Thanks.
Let's see, how do I start this? No music. I used to start with money, and then we had a clip of, for a while there, Show Me the Money with Tom Cruise, okay? It's not always about money, okay? And we know that for a fact. The Great Reshuffle is not about money. Let me explain what it's about. We're going to get into that today. It's always about money, as I said in the past. It's always about money, but let's say it's more about something else that's happening in the environment at the same time. Ken and I were talking about earlier. If I was an economist right now, there's 7, 8 different things happening all at the same time that we're dealing with. I'm a big advocate. What's happening today is supply and demand. And it always goes, compensation is related to supply and demand. And I've said that for many years in terms of all the different components. But we're going to talk about that today. So let's get into the agenda. I'm going to spend a few minutes about, my company and what we do. But compensation practices for today's workforce. It hasn't changed for we did a survey of millennials about 10 years ago and did it multiple years in a row. And so now I'm going to talk about how the millennials have grown up and now are in the next phase of their career. And that's part of what's happening in the marketplace today. It's the supply and demand for labor. And we're going to talk about a modern compensation philosophy. Everybody has heard people say pay for performance for 50,000 years, I would say, for a long time. And I've been saying this for a long time, that is the most overused terminology in the workplace, pay for performance. We're going to show you what, trying to turn that into something modern and actually for the modern times. We'll talk about that. I'm going to spend a lot of time. So I'm going to sound, instead of a compensation consultant, I'm going to sound like a human resources person today. So I'm going to talk about the Great Resignation and the Reshuffle. That's a typo on that next piece. We're not going to be talking about geographic differential and assessment for Atlanta and Denver. We're not going to be talking about that.
So looking forward to that.
I can't believe that's there. And then hopefully I have the right presentation up. We're going to talk about modern-based pay practices, because that's what's fueling this. It's not about the incentive as much as it is about paying me competitively in the marketplace, and it starts with base pay. And then we're going to talk about market data transparency. How do you know what's going on in the marketplace? And if you're a leader, you need to have information before somebody comes and asks you questions. If you're not, you're in the dark. So we're talking about that. And actually, I'm going to show you a real live example of one of my clients. It's a larger company, but it's a good example of how they approach how they were prepared for the Great Resignation, because they started in doing this 5 years ago, and it's actually helped them be in the right spot at the right time with the right information to have this conversation with their employees. We'll do some case studies. Everybody has heard, their friends or somebody getting a 30% increase. I have an example of a person getting a $50,000 offer for a new job, $50,000 increase. And there's a lot that goes into that $50,000 that we'll drill down on that a little bit. And then we're going to do role play. Okay, so Optimum Comp Advantage. We specialize in executive and broad-based compensation practices. As you can see, we start with philosophy and strategies, because if you start in a company, if you start with philosophy and strategy, then you have a mission for what you're going to be doing with your compensation practices. So that's the framework of where you're going. Executive broad-based compensation studies, incentive plan and sales incentive plan design, performance optimization. Stop calling it performance management. That's another archaic terminology that sounds like you need to manage performance. If you optimize your performance cycle and make it a collaboration effort, then you don't have to manage it. Performance management also sounds like the PIP, Performance Improvement Plan, right? So managers don't need to manage performance, they need to engage and optimize employees' performance. So modernize terminology. You're gonna hear me talk about, stop saying archaic language that the new generation doesn't resonate with, right? So you gotta modernize. We do career track job structures, and you're gonna see this is modern compensation in terms of making sure you have the information. And again, we do a lot of sales incentive plan design. In fact, if a number of you have seen me present when I've come to SMLA in the past, we present on how to design sales incentive plans for your organization. And Jack and I are teaming up, and one of the things that we now have is not only sales incentive plan design, but also helping companies with sales force effectiveness. And that's what Jack brings to our organization. Little quick introduction. Jolene has been with us. Jolene McKee, she's a compensation consultant, been with Optimum Comp Advantage for almost 4 years. So she's moved up and has been trained and actually is now a compensation consultant. Joe Alvarez, he is 6 months, 8 months, 10 months?
4 or 5.
4 or 5, okay. Seems like I've known him for 100 years.
In a good way.
So in a very good way. In a very good way. Exactly. And then Jack, Optimum Comp Advantage has a team of, I started this company 8 years ago. I think we were talking about it. I started the company 8 years ago as a one-person shop, and I had a friend that was helping me on his spare time. And now we're 8 employees. The first year I started this business, I made $30,000, literally $30,000. And we make a lot more than that now. Let me jump to this whole piece around the workforce today. And this has not changed. This was the original study. We called it the Millennial Influence. And it basically, we did it a number of years. And the first time we did it, it was all about base pay. If you remember 10 years ago, millennials were staying in the job a year, 18 months. Everybody remember that? That was like front news all the time. Well, they were doing that because companies were using traditional pay practice. Hey, I'm going to get you as cheap as possible, and then you're part of our merit increase program, and you'll get a raise of 2 to 3% every year. Well, that doesn't work for me because I can go across the street after 12 months of experience and get a $5,000 raise, 10% raise. So that's not changed, right? So we have that going on now. What changed in the study? So we know base pay is the most important thing. It's the foundation of every compensation plan, except for maybe part of the sales force in terms of people that are fully commissioned and all that. But for everybody else, base pay is the biggest part. And again, the top executives, it's about equity. Okay, but I'm talking about the masses. What changed in the study, which is important today to understand, is that when we first did it, the millennials didn't care about incentive plans. Well, they were entry-level jobs, right? Even first couple levels, so incentives weren't important. But as their career advances, incentives became very important. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But what's important that we saw back then, and it's important today, that the pillars of effective motivators for employees is competitive base pay, career and incentive opportunities, and interesting and challenging work are the company culture. That hasn't changed, and you're going to see that during the presentation. This is very important to understand. It's foundation. I'm going to reflect back on this in the next slide, which is what we call a modern compensation philosophy and strategies. We don't say pay for performance. We tell our clients to change the picture, pay for success. And guess what? It's not just about the company's success, it's about the individual success. Help an employee be successful. That sounds kind of interesting, right? And so what we want to do is create an environment in companies that get supported by compensation practices. So I've heard the word, people have been telling me that compensation needs to be transparent for 50 years. And now we're saying, it needs to be transparent. Well, have we ever not made it transparent? That's what the problem is. It's never become transparent. I interviewed for a job in a corporation, big company up in Silicon Valley. And the head of HR told me, this popped into my head, I got to tell you the story. There's this big mantra out there that, everybody wants transparency. So we took all of our incentive plan documents and wrote on them transparent incentive plan. And now they're transparent because we wrote the word transparent on them. That's some of the stuff out there that people do that just doesn't make any sense. So really, if you really want to engage and motivate and retain your workforce, you've got to really have your managers trained to share the why and how of compensation to build that engaged workforce. Customize. You can't just say, hey, we got an incentive plan or a bonus plan. Everybody gets a payout if we perform well. You've got to customize them to the different parts of your organization. Doesn't mean it's not, you fund it based on company's ability to pay. That doesn't change. But how do you customize your incentive plans to motivate people to achieve what you want them to do, instead of saying, hey, we'll all get a bonus if the company performs well, but work really hard. I mean, that makes no sense, right? And companies still do that today. They still say, we're all in this together, we'll all get a bonus if the company performs. Well, that's the metrics for the CEO and the C-suite, right? So you're holding all your accounts, so you're not getting alignment from the bottom up. You're doing alignment from the top down. Value, we don't call it merit increases. You really want to know, you want to link the employees' competitive base pay for the job they're in. So you got to know the market. You got to know what the competitive landscape is. And then you have to be able to understand and explain to the employee where they're at in their career in terms of that job they are in today and the future progression that they can have in an organization. And then again, success is kind of, here's the incentive plans. Reward employees based on the level of achievement of financial goals. And this says crave goals. We use the word crave goals instead of SMART goals because SMART goals aren't smart. So the problem with SMART goals is they say achievable. If you make everything achievable, you're not moving your company's dime, right? Starts there. So SMART goals are not very smart. Crave goals are aspirational, and you need to get those in place. So if anybody wants to know more about crave goals, I can share that. And we know, again, the bottom statement here is really important. We know effective compensation and performance practices that have to be integrated will establish a strong connection between individuals' personal results and the success of the company, okay? Important fact. Well, okay, so now I'm switching gears. The Great Resignation, and I always thought the Great Resignation was I mean, everybody's probably thought this. Well, the terminology doesn't make sense because people aren't resigning and going and living in a cave. They're getting new jobs. And so, and that's part of what we're going to talk about. Why are they looking for new jobs? And I'm going to reflect back on the millennial generation, okay, when I talk about this. Okay, the Great Resignation. This is some facts. 4 million Americans quit their jobs in July. Well, not to go home and set, but they resigned to get a new job, okay? So all this information is out there. But what's going on? Resignation's highest among mid-level employees. It's 35 to 45-year-old people that are leaving into new jobs. They're at the point where you got to think about how many directors of sales do you have in your organization, or how many, vice presidents of human resources. People get the skill set. This is what we've taught in this. My big client is that when people leave, celebrate. They're advancing, because their next job is your job, right? And if you don't progress, they can't progress, right? So when they leave, celebrate, because guess what? They might want to come back a few years later in a new role in your organization. I remember, and you guys probably, a few people in the room I remember a company I worked for, when somebody resigned, they escorted them to the door. Okay? It was commonly, I worked in the healthcare industry.
We won't name names.
Yeah, with the box there. I guess you guys remember that. But that's not the world today, right? And I was in the HMO industry in Southern California, and there was 10 players, right? And if you were going to a competitor, they didn't even let you, after you said they probably would put you in handcuffs and take you to the door because it was very competitive. That was one of the reasons. But there's other reasons. But that's changed today. Today's world is you should be celebrating and hoping that person, if that person's a really good employee, you should be celebrating with them. And then, maybe they fit in your organization down the road. Okay, so that's what's happening. Resignations are highest in tech and healthcare industries. well, it's really high in healthcare industries. My wife's an advanced life support nurse, and they have all these COVID restrictions. So people are, if you're at a certain age, they're leaving the industry, they're out, okay? And that, as you know, now we have a shortage of nurses, as an example, and healthcare people. So as you see, this is moving. And so this is just data. And the last piece here is employees really need to take a data-driven approach to improving retention. Again, we're talking about retention and how do you retain your employees. And it's called transparency and be, having a plan before you need to do it, right? Okay, let's talk about 2021 turnover. Okay, career reasons continue to be the #1 cause of employee resignation. It's not life balance, it's I'm building my career, and at the company I'm in, it's not there anymore. So, and this has been the #1 reason forever. People leave for career advancement. That's just a natural case. Pay is not the primary driver of attrition. It hasn't been. So when you think about, and I have some case studies that we've heard, nobody is going, I'm going to the exact same job I'm in today for a 50% increase. You don't hear that story. That's not what's happening. A lot of times it's promotion, it's opportunity, and it's in counteroffer. When this is one of the, we did some case studies at one of my clients, counteroffers. This is what, in fact, I asked a person that we're trying, not to our company, but I'm in the interview process for one of my clients. And I always ask this question: if I make you a job offer, what can your current employer do to retain you? Okay, I asked Joe and Jolene that, right? When they were interviewing with us. I didn't ask Jack that though. So it's an important answer to make. So, if somebody says, well, if they decide to promote me, and I'm thinking, if they decide to promote you after you resign, so this is the case. So this is when people say you can't get a counteroffer. So here's an example of an employee. They were a director of finance. Person's resigning. Well, the counteroffer is we can promote you to a senior director. My response to that boss would be, why haven't you promoted me yet? So I would still leave because the company isn't doing this. The other thing with counteroffers, and this has always been, when you accept a counteroffer, the boss that you accept that with, you got to think about this, now doesn't trust you because you were looking for a job, but they retained you because they need you in place for the next year. I've actually been in an organization where I told this story and people were looking at me like I was shocked, where they did the counteroffer, person stayed, 3 months later, they were part of the RIF that the company went through. So that's the kind of stuff that you got to be careful about when it stays. You got to have purpose for staying. And you should be asking, why haven't you talked to me about career opportunity in the past? Why is it now an issue when I've resigned? Okay, just a caution. So that's happening. Flexibility driving work-life balance and attrition. Work-life balance, people leaving companies for work-life balance hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. It's still the same percentage people leaving for work-life balance. So that didn't change because of the pandemic. So that's some information. And again, we'll send this presentation out to everybody, and the people in the room have copies of it. It's a lot of information. Retention drivers, people first culture. Think about this. What retains people in an organization? It's actually not pay. I always tell you this, there's all the most important reasons aren't pay. But if you don't have the right pay practices, all those other reasons don't matter. But so have the right pay practices, and then you can retain people with the things that matter, okay? Opportunities to develop goes back to that, the philosophy and the millennial influence. People want career opportunity and have a progression in their career, and that relates to more money. But I think the career progression drives the person, not the money. Money is important, but again, it's career opportunity. I want to advance. I've worked my whole career. I have hired junior people and trained them. That's been my mantra. And I've worked in big companies, and you have a pipeline of junior people that you can train and mold and educate and they become your best employees because they're knowing it. But you got to remember too, they also have career aspirations. So you got to have a career path for them. I talk some of the stuff. I'm old, so you guys got to deal with my longevity stuff.
Hey, same age as you, so
Old is a relative.
But, they're actually, Jolene and Joe are actually Z generation. So we have Z's here, which are, yep. So this is amazing when you get to be my age and you're hiring people that are younger than your own kids. I mean, it is really kind of strange. It was strange when I was hiring people that were my kids' age. It was strange enough. And then when I was hiring people that were born when I was, graduating from high school. I thought that was weird. And so, yeah, long time. So opportunities to develop, really important. And then a sense of purpose at work. I mean, we've heard this. When millennials were coming in, they wanted to go to a culture that, they could work with and all that. So that's still there. And then pay people right. You have to pay people right or they will leave. Okay. So what's this mean? People first culture. You have this, you see it, and I'm not going to read them all. Hybrid workforce today, that's something you better have. When the pandemic was starting to decline, the CEOs in New York said, hey, you guys got to come back to work in the city. And people are going, are you out of your mind? And they said, yeah, you come back or I'm reducing your pay. Because a lot of them went to have different, less cost of living places like Florida. And so that was their retort. If you don't come back to San Francisco or come back to New York, I'm going to start reducing your pay because the competitive pay in Tampa Bay is a lot different than in New York. Okay. So that's stuff that happens. But, you think about it, You Matter platform, that's a recognition platform. You're having things that say you matter, internal meeting breaks, culture clubs, kudos culture, all this stuff you have to have. Opportunities, job postings internally, company university, career progression. We talk about that. How do you make sure people know they have a career progression? Promotions. I would tell you the number one retention tool is getting promoted. Having a plan to promote people through the career progression is the number one retention practice you can have, okay? I was gonna say, remember the Saturday night, I was jumping back to the when millennials were first coming in the Saturday night episode, Saturday Night Live, and the young millennial woman comes in and says, first question she asks her new boss is, when can I get promoted? Well, the answer is, if you had a career track job structure and career progression, it's like, okay, so you're in a comp analyst job today. And these are the skills you need to build over this period of time. If you build them faster or slower, we'll decide when you get promoted based on when you build the skill set for the next level. Okay, so that's being prepared, and that's what I'm talking about. Is companies have to be prepared to deal with this. Leader forums, mentoring programs, coaching opportunities. That's the opportunity to develop. If you just hire, I worked for a company that paid people about 20% higher than anybody in the market. Junior level people were getting $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 bonuses on a quarterly basis. Okay, they had 50% turnover. The culture was so horrible. When people asked, the millennial would say, hey, why did you give me a $20,000 bonus? And the manager would say, just take it and shut up and keep working hard. Literally, this was the culture. So they would leave because what they do, this is back when millennials were first starting. You heard that they would just go home and live with their parents while they look for a new job. Well, if I have $100,000 in my pocket, I can go live with mom and dad and look for a job and take 6 months, right? So that's what was going on. So this company didn't know what they were doing.
Tim,
yes.
sorry for the interruption, but when we hear in the media the Great Resignation, it's kind of painted like everybody's just not working or they're finding their own business. And you're making the point that they're finding new jobs. And that's kind of not the impression.
Yeah.
And I have selfish reasons for asking this because I have a program that helps people start their own consulting business. So my mindset listening to you is, okay, I need to have the mindset that I'm trying to hire the corporate people away into my programs.
Correct.
But do you have a sense of what percent, or have you seen data on the percent that are leaving to start their own business, to be entrepreneurs, something?
It was
Is
a
it pretty
record last year.
small?
Yeah,
I don't know percentage wise, but when I read, it was like something like 5.5 million new businesses were started last year, which is a record.
right, and that's part of what Ken and I,
Nationally, yeah.
and what Ken and I were talking about earlier, the the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, I had employers saying, oh, wow, I'm gonna be able to, these people are all gonna get laid off. I'm gonna be able to hire them really cheap. Again, the cheap strategy, which doesn't work. And I was saying, no, that's not what's gonna happen. They actually stopped our services because they thought, oh, we can just hire tons of people. We don't need to know what compensation, because I'm gonna get everybody cheap. And I told them, this is not what's gonna happen. What's gonna happen is there's gonna be an expansion of jobs and companies starting, because now you need new technology. You're going to need new businesses started to deal with all the different things, and that's what we saw. We saw that immediately happening when it started happening, right? I mean, you saw that. So I would tell you, and then you heard a lot of people, instead of they were losing their jobs, what do people do when they lose their jobs? They start their own company, because that's always been too. So I would tell you, it's probably a large population of people starting their own businesses.
So the technology has enabled people to start accelerated, not just Zoom, but everything else, Slack, whatever. It's just so much easier to run a company out of your home.
I feel like the big question is, are any of them gonna make money?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And so
but what's driving
where will
it
go?
are these three things at the top here,
Yeah.
right? Because if you can't find those three things, maybe you've gone to 3 different companies, you still can't find it. I can create this environment if I'm in charge, right? I want to be able to drive this. So that's why I think you see a lot of people starting their own companies, because they're unable to find these 3 things up here as far as that goes. And my thing with compensation is you need to eliminate that noise on compensation so the employee can focus on being productive and you can focus on creating this sort of culture in your organization.
Right. So, and I'll tell you a unique story later about culture in the company that's still kind of sticking. That isn't part of the new company where they're going as an organization. But okay, and then you see sense of purpose, all that same stuff. You gotta have that in your organization or people aren't gonna stay. Pay people right. You gotta pay people for success. You've gotta pay people right. Pay transparency. You gotta tell them that you're paid lower in the base pay range because you're progressing in your career. You've got to be open. You've got to know the data. If you don't know the data, you can't have that conversation. You've got to have competitive based pay plans. You've got to have competitive based pay practices in your organization and be transparent. And when I say transparent, let me explain. There's a difference between transparency and what am I looking for? Disclosure, full disclosure. Transparency is giving them the information that they need to understand. You don't need to give them, like, compensation is a lot of artwork, believe me. This isn't just, if anybody could do it, we wouldn't have a company. It's an artwork, and if you explain everything to everybody of how you create a competitive base pay range, they would say, oh, I don't believe that. Okay, so I mean, you would just give them every piece of ammunition to sabotage the program. And you see that just like if you were a head of sales. If you gave them, when you're selling something, if you give them, when you're selling a software package, and if you give them every little problem that could happen, they're not going to hire you. But the odds of those problems happening are low, right? And if they do happen, then you basically then have to react. So again, full disclosure, it's different than being transparent. Okay. Recognition, valued benefits, and I mean valued benefits. I had a client, and when I say a client, they're a bunch of old guys. They made me look young running this business. And they said, we don't understand our turnover. We have a deferred profit sharing plan that gives them 20% of their base pay every year. And they just say, well, who cares about that? We leave because I want higher base pay, I want higher incentives. Okay? Well, the valued benefits were for the top guys that ran the company. That 20%, they were getting ready to retire. They wanted that money. The people that were lower in the organization aren't worried about retirement. They're worried about their career progression. They didn't get that at all. When I said that, they looked at me like I was crazy. But but you got to make sure your benefits are meeting the needs of your target employee base. Okay. So this is just informational. The stay interviews, and I'm going to say this is another piece of transparency. What you should be doing now is having conversations with your employees. What does this talk about? Help managers understand why employees stay and what might cause them to leave. Well, if you don't have a career progression for them, you need to understand your own practices and do that. So you need to teach your managers how they would do this. I would like to talk to you about the reasons you stay at OCA. Why would you stay? I had an employee, a 6.5-year employee, Caitlin. You remember Caitlin? She worked for me for 6.5 years and trained and worked from a comp analyst to a senior compensation consultant. She resigned during the Great Resignation. And, it's like, well, she had a career plan that she wanted to do. And that's, fit into her career plan. Again, I'll also tell you, 6 months later, she's telling me she can't wait to get back into consulting. She committed to the person that hired her that she would stay 2 years. And then she wants to get back into consulting. So very important, she wanted to do something to broaden her ability to progress in her career. And that's what she did. So again, what are the informal talk points that you need to have on an ongoing basis? This is just informational for you guys to have. Because it's not about, the counteroffer. If you're waiting to the counteroffer, it's a mistake. Okay, so here's some information. I received this email this morning that said, it was from a recruiter that said comp inflation was 15% for this year. And I was like, wow, where'd you get that information? I'd like to see the data that supports that, because it's really not that. One of the things is, this is interesting. So salary increase budgets. I mean, I've always talked about how dumb this is, just to think about a salary increase budget. What creates this is World at Work puts out a survey, and they ask all the comp managers in the country, what are you projecting your base pay increase budget's going to be for next year? Well, for 20 years, it was about 3%. Okay, because inflation was low, all those, all that stuff was doing good. It was 3%. So why did they keep doing the survey? Why didn't they just say, hey, it's going to be 3% again this year? It declined to 2.7% during the pandemic, which was huge, right? I mean, a lot of people said it was going to go to zero. There were some companies that went to no increases, but the player companies understood they needed to have increases for their talent, right? And then they said for this year it was going to be 3.2, and now they're projecting more like 3.9. What's funny about this, why I make fun of this, is that I'm going to show you information that companies that just say, hey, let's do what the average in the marketplace is, are making a mistake, because you have to understand where you are against the market, not the average merit increase budget. This is a finance equation. This is not a competitive pay practice that you should be doing. Labor shortages likely to continue in 2022. Supply and demand of people that have the skills that you need. That's the main cause of pay going up. Okay, that's what's happening. It's a supply and demand issue. Overall wage growth. So this is what I was saying. This is the point. She said 15%. Overall wage growth projection for the coming next 12 months, 3.2 to 4%. This is what economists are saying, right? So
that's every job. That's frontline workers. That's
everything.
That's welders.
Yeah, it's all combined into one number. And I would tell you that's bad too, because it's just one number. Different industries. I'm going to show you a live study of where you can see that it's not the same for all. So if you think about 3.9%, well, let's just apply that across the board in our company. Another mistake, because certain jobs went up in value, other jobs, I tell you, during even, you hear about pay going up, there's jobs that didn't change in the marketplace. The pay did not go up. I'll give you an example. HR generalist, kind of flat because supply and demand. There's a lot of HR generalists in the marketplace. Compensation professionals up 17% because supply and demand, okay?
Also another, it's only 16 or 18 states now, but the new law that says you can't ask a potential new employee what they're currently making.
Yeah.
That's also, at least in our experience on the recruiting side, that's also driven compensation levels up but in a good way, because now companies are forced to actually attach value
Right.
to the job. What is this job worth? As opposed to, we'll pay you based on 5%.
Or how
above
cheap we can
what
get
made
you.
before. Yeah,
Or
exactly.
how
right.
we can cheap
And
we
it's
can
it's
get
doing
you.
a good job from what I've read so far. It is helping to narrow that pay gap, the gender pay gap, to some extent, at least in those 18.
You know, in California, so let's talk about California, they passed that law, plus they also say now when somebody asks, you have to share the pay range, right? Okay, I've been telling companies to share the pay range on the front end for 30 years because then this is what happens. We're looking for a software engineer and the recruiter, we go to an outside recruiter, right? And the outside recruiter brings back principal software engineers that make $80,000 more a year than what you wanted to pay. And the manager, they have them interview, and the problem is now that doesn't fit into what your cost structure was. Of course, it's not a fit with the person's talent. So if you actually share the range, then the people that are applied that fit into your structure. So I like this. When they did that, oh, thank you. Thank you for the law. This is like, it's actually really good for people. It actually helps people understand what they're getting into. It helps, instead of, being in the situation where this is what happens. So I go to this is what happens. I'm gonna hire a principal software engineer to a software engineer job, and I'm gonna pay him $30,000 above the market because we really want this person. And then in year 2, we say, wow, you're highly paid compared to our range for software engineers. Start there. It's so the person leaves, right? So it's all about having the right structure in place. I would have said, hire him as a principal software engineer because he's probably paid around the market for that job. And then, just get over that and build a structure inside your company and hire them right. But companies don't do that.
So Tim,
Yes.
so this market data, is that fairly accurate? Because now people have to look at that since you're not telling the company what salary you're making, right? Or you're expecting. So
Well,
you should depend on that market data.
As I talk about pay people right, you should
Yeah.
pay people based on the market. So and we're going to talk about this later in the pay practices. I'm going to talk about how do you hire somebody. I'll talk about that in terms of what does a company need to do when they're hiring somebody. So I'll talk about that. But let's pull that for a second. Modern pay practices. I'm jumping to that right now. Okay. So again, this is a wheel of a company. Culture and experience. Let's start with that in terms of our total reward elements. You've got to have the right culture and experience for the employee in your programs. We talk performance optimization, professional development, equity, annual incentive, base pay, benefits, and recognition appreciation. That's a model. You need all of that to make it work. Modern base pay practices. You won't see the word merit anywhere in this presentation. In fact, I wrote an article, and everybody that's heard me present probably have heard me say this. In 1997, I wrote an article that said merit pay is dead, and it has been dead for 10 years. And it was in World at Work and everything, and people still call it merit increases. But it's not. And I'm going to show you a slide, what is going on and what people believe in the marketplace. Okay, so this is about our base pay program. Reflects. Now I'm going to show you, this is a lot of these slides are a real company and how they communicate to their employees. Our base pay program reflects the individual's value developed over time, consisting of knowledge, skills, and ability to perform their job. Okay. The program's foundation enables the company to link market competitiveness to the individual's ongoing value. We're going to talk about value over time, knowledge, skills, and ability, and market competitiveness. Okay, that's what you need to know. So inflation is up, right? So we get from all over the world, we need to give our employees a cost of living increase because inflation is up. Like, really? Do you even know what a cost of living increase is? So everybody starts doing this, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to tell you why over here. I'm going to jump to that right away. Globally, COLA still dominates many workers' perception of their annual merit raise, believing that these are given to cover cost of living, not based on performance. That is real and has been, back to my story, that's been going on for a long time, okay? And that's because it's 2 or 3%. That's got to be related to cost of living because that's sure not related to my performance, okay? So you got to have that frame. A COLA is a pre-negotiated annual base pay increase. Union contracts have them, right? Stipulated in the employee's contract. Collected on a global basis, it's the same thing. So cost of living increases, there's still companies, I go into clients and they're giving, their merit budget is 3% and everybody gets 2% cost of living increase. I'm going, why don't you just have a 5% budget based on performance and pay the people more that are delivering the results? Why are you moving every person up at the same rate? So we had this in this big company, this that I work for, and people were asking cost of living. And basically the CPO said, okay, here's your choice. Everybody gets the same pay raise at 2% this year, or we're gonna pay you based on your value. You choose. She didn't say it that way, but this is basically what she said. We can have this. Do you think anybody selected the cost of living increase? Not a single person jumped up and said, yeah, let's do that.
Except for the ones that are lazy and they're not performing.
Correct. Well, they didn't, those people don't
It's 0
talk.
or 2%.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, you know, a lot of pay practices, like traditional compensation practices, create a mediocre culture. And mediocre employees stay because they're comfortable. Okay, so I've said that probably way too many times. So this is really information to know. Again, only 11% of US companies are doing cost of living. This was presented to the employees because the employers are saying, hey, are we gonna get a cost of living increase? It's like, it was amazing. That's the questions they were asking inside this large corporation. We had to deal with that. Okay, so informational. Let's keep going. Career track job structure. This is what you need to have so you can have that conversation when somebody comes to you and says, what is my, when do I get promoted? You can't say, and I tell these stories of going to companies and went to Callaway Golf. I worked there for about a few years, and first day in the office, 10 younger people, millennials came to me and said, how do I get promoted in this organization? And my answer was, what did your manager say when you asked them? They said, work really hard, and when we think you should be promoted, we will promote you. That's the traditional answer, right? And so that doesn't work. These people all were there, 12 to 18 months and they left.
I'm reading this really great book by a couple of Gartner consultants called the Connected Manager.
Oh, cool.
And they talk a lot about, kind of like the old GE days of putting people in buckets of ABC.
Yep.
They do the same thing, but not to the same negative extent, but in terms of their promotability.
Right.
And are they ready to go?
Yep.
They need more support. They're almost there. They're
Yep.
ready to go now. It needs to happen now.
Right.
They talk about kind of categorizing employees in terms of their promotability and timeline as well.
Yeah, and that should be discussed with the employee.
Right.
Openly,
Exactly.
transparently, right? So the employee knows what they're planning. So I love that. I love that all the way. Okay, so this actually, the framework, career track, foundation of the company's job and compensation practices. Job profile clearly defines the responsibility scope. It's a job description, right? Base pay range. Every job has a competitive base pay range. Don't have a grade structure. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Career progressions. This is what this actually does. Okay, so this is what people need to be able to say. So this is a career track for a large company in finance, accounting. This is just the accounting part, not the finance part. But so you need to be a manager needs to be able to be trained, entry, market, and top. And you need to coordinate that with progression of how, where's the employee? Let me tell you, performance review, progressing, successful, role model, and some terminology. So if I'm progressing in my career, I should be paid between entry and market. If I'm fully successful in my job, I should be paid around the market. That's where people should be paid. That's market-driven compensation. If I'm a stellar in that job, I should be paid more than the market. And I'm not saying immediate, it's ongoing. You got to remember, I had a conversation with one of my clients today, as chief people officer. This is always about, when you're doing a pay process, it's about ongoing value and consistent demonstration of that, because people can deliver a bunch and then they go flat. So you gotta talk about, you gotta be consistent with your results over time, and I'll keep moving your pay up as you deliver and become fully successful in your job. And then again, the point of people getting above the market seems in earlier stages in their career should be really hard, because if you're an accounting coordinator and you're successful moving toward role model, well, I would have promoted you. So being in the top part of the range in the earlier jobs, that shouldn't really exist if your company is being proactive with promotions. Remember I said promotions, do you think the accounting coordinator, if they're paid there, is gonna stay? No, they're gonna be looking for that next level job, and they're still gonna make more money because they'll go into the next range. So you have to, that's really what it's about. And when people say that there's employees out there that say, oh, I'm real comfortable in the job I'm at, that's okay, but you don't have to keep giving them pay raises in the upper part of the market. So that's the other part of this, and I'll show that. So does that answer your question? I wanted to make sure I track back. So this is a model. When you're looking at, because the old style compensation would say, let's have a merit matrix, and if you're successful and your pay is around the market, we're going to give you a 3% raise. That's why it's called cost of living increase, because it's not about performance. I would say if somebody's successful in their job and they're paid at the market, they don't need a raise. They're paid appropriately, okay? But, okay, so this model really shows if I have a budget of money, how do I spend it? Well, I'm going to spend it on the green and then the blue and then the red. So I'm going to work through that process, because who's going to leave? And this is part of the case studies we talk about. It's the person that the company's not on top of the market and they've stayed in a job, and so they're making, let's say $100,000, but the market value of the job is 150. But they stayed in the job, and then all of a sudden supply and demand comes up and they're giving a $50,000 raise to go into another job. And it might be a different job, different parameters and everything, but that's what's happening. So you have to make sure, if you want to retain your high performing employees, you've got to move their pay up. And then you got to have that conversation with the blues. Hey, you're paid appropriately. Here's the range. Here's why. I would tell you that this person and this person, you should prioritize over the top two blues, right? And then I really struggle giving the top red, who is successful and paid at the top of the range, more money. What the conversation should be is, our expectation is that you're a role model. You're paid at the role model level. You should be performing better. And that's a conversation. And these are a lot of the conversations I'm having here is you got to understand where you're at when you have those conversations in the economy. So different times in my career, we had people top paid and low performing. So the reds. And we were able to say, improve your performance, or we're going to start reducing your pay. Well, that's not the environment we're working in today. Those people would be gone in pretty quickly. So you got to be careful with that. But there's plenty of time. So you got to understand what's happening in the marketplace when you have different conversations, and it changes.
Yeah, and in a situation like that, though, it's also what effect is that person having on the rest of the organization too.
Right.
So, because if people know they're not doing well, but they're getting paid well, how does that change your culture?
Well, early in my career, HR would tell everybody, don't share your compensation. Or we're going to fire you. And of course, that was the stupidest, funniest thing I ever heard in my life, because people do that. They do share it with it. I think maybe, of course, the top people in publicly traded companies, everybody knows what they make, right? But I think there's a level where that stops, but I think people do share that. And so now we have a law that you can't tell employees not to share it. It's like we needed to have a law that actually said that. Okay, so people share. And so if I'm in the same job as somebody that's paid at the top of the range and is a poor performer, what's that happen? What Jack was talking about, how does that impact the environment you're working in? Because people will know that person's paid really high. Okay, so how much time? I gotta check that.
We're at 9:30.
Oh, good, we have enough time. Okay, so now this is actual company information of one of my clients. And it starts with transparency around data. And nobody trusts data, right? Well, really? But so that's been the mantra of what I've dealt with my whole career is, where do you get your data? Is it accurate? Because my friend just got a job for this in the same job I'm doing and they're paid more. Well, is your friend more competent than you? Is it a bigger company? Is it a different market? It might be the same job, but industries pay different. So understand that, right? So going to a finance job at a bank actually pays less than a finance job in restaurants because of, the structure and everything, right? Okay, so this really says this company's looking at different surveys for different parts of the organization. They have a consulting department, that's VinCon, it's a consulting survey. Culpeper is for professional services, it's a professional services organization. IPAS is a global, Equal executive comp. So they look at a lot of data. And then, competitive peer group. We're looking at companies that are our size. As Ken knows, smaller companies pay different than larger companies. Public companies trade different than private companies. So all that stuff goes into play. And this was industry professional services, consulting, and business services. Okay, so that's what we're looking at in terms of the competition. And then market differential for base pay. That's the other big buzz that's out there right now is since we're letting people work remote, how do we do geographic? So look at a corporate office in Irvine. So what's your strategy if our corporate employees move to Idaho? What range, what geographic adjustment are you going to do? This client's a large client, has now put in no geo adjustments for APS, which is consulting, SEA is strategic accounts, and GOE is operations. We're not geo adjusting those ranges because those people can work anywhere. So we're using the national average competitive pay for those jobs. Where territory sales, they have to be in the local market. They are being geographically adjusted. Corporate, as they expand out, we're changing the practices. And then, what level do you stop doing geo adjustments? We traditionally compensation professionals would stop at the director level. Of course, anything above the director level would not be geo adjusted because the marketplace is broader than just the local market. So this is some information. So this actually shows you, this is what a company is sharing with their employees, transparency around where we get our data and we believe in it. Yeah.
So are you saying in the current environment, companies are not adjusting if people move to another lower?
No, I'm saying every company has its own strategy. So let me explain. Okay, so one company, there's actually a company that I consulted with that said, we're going to stop doing geographic adjustments even in Irvine. We're stopped completely. And guess what? The CEO said, you can find employees in Idaho that can do the job for a lot less money than in San Francisco. So if you want to hire somebody in San Francisco, then, it's a software company. Right. You can find people in lower economic areas, okay, that can do the job. So I have another company that said, hey, we're in Irvine. We're going to adjust all of our jobs no matter what at the Irvine geographic differential. And their strategy was, well, that gives us a competitive advantage in Chicago, gives us a competitive advantage in Idaho. Everybody will come to work for us. It was a strategy around attracting the best of the best with pay, okay? So that's how dynamic it is. I mean, every company has their own ability to choose.
Yeah, I think the one challenge that companies are doing that, but they're not investing in training their managers on how do you actually manage a remote employee.
Right.
And so the people that are in the office, just by nature of the managers seeing them day in and day out, they tend to get, they're more of a champion for that person because they see them, stronger ties to that person versus the remote employee. Yeah. So a lot of this has to adjust in terms of how people manage as well. Right. Not just the compensation piece.
Right, yeah. Exactly. That absolutely.
That manager training is crucial because many people don't know how to manage people.
Well, for 100 years, we've all managed the same way. If I can't see you, I can't manage you, and I don't.
And they tend to micromanage by saying, "Okay, are you logged in? Are you?"
Right.
So
exactly.
So Ken, I've been a manager for over 35 years now, and I've always believed interacting with the people and training them live and in person. I was freaked when my senior consultant resigned. I had I have employees at one of my clients that are dedicated to a client. I had my director of consulting inside that company resigned. And how am I going to onboard people? Well, Joe's sitting right here. He's been trained via Zoom. We interviewed him via Zoom, and he's doing great. And I was paranoid about this. Sandra, we had an analyst resign. Sandra, my director up there, actually trained, we met the person once live after she started. We had a masked lunch where we met her live, but she had worked for us like 3 months before that. And Sandra trained her. She's like the best employee. Sandra then resigned, and this person that was trained by her via Zoom has assumed all of her 80% of her responsibilities, and that much, and that quickly. So it can't happen, and I was a mess. I didn't facilitate that. It was just people engage, right? So you guys should ask Jolene and Joe how that's going, because
But it's great you have that mindset where you were at least, maybe you were stressed about it, but you had the open mind to at least allow for it.
well, it was the only thing that could happen,
A lot
right?
of managers are like, no, it's either this way or the
Oh,
highway,
yeah.
and you have to be in the office, I don't care what's going on.
You know, you guys know the old stories. We'll talk about this a little bit. Okay, so I've been in the human resources internal for a long time before I started this company, and remote people, software developer. How many companies are they working for? You don't know, right? So we had I worked at Callaway Golf, and they had remote salespeople all over the United States selling to the golf courses. Well, if we discovered, because I was like, they weren't performing, right? So I'm looking at, well, what could be going on? Well, a third of them were working for Callaway and possibly 2 other companies during season. They were doing the season for golf, and then they were doing the season for snowmobiles, and then they were doing the season for something else. And they've discovered this, right? Well, what Callaway did was they changed, instead of only having one season, they sell new products all through the season. So the people have to be engaged. But that's what you find. So it was scary, right? How do I manage a remote workforce? So I joke about this. I joke about this, Ken, all the time. Well, you know what's coming? What's coming is that if you want a job at our company, we're going to put a video camera in your office. And we're going to see when you're working. We're going to record that. And that's not that far-fetched, because you guys know truck drivers have video cams in their trucks now. And they're watched all day, anytime they're driving.
Got a big company here in Analytics.
That's what they do. It was it was a client.
Look up cameras at home.
No, in the trucks.
In the trucks, yeah.
And I have a friend who works in, like pharmacy, case management type stuff, and she's always worked remote, she's always had a camera and like a thing that monitors her mouse movement and her clicks and stuff like that.
That's actually been around longer than, that's been around a long time. So I worked in the healthcare industry, and everybody, all the call center employees, every single thing of it was monitored. They knew how many clicks, all that was true. So that's the world. It's going to become more of that, because people don't trust their employees to work, right? Okay, but that's goes back to your point, Ken. Managing a remote workforce is difficult. Jolene works, all through the day, and she's a night person. Well, I'm a morning person. So, in the old world would be, no, Jolene, you have to be in the office at 8 to 5. And then, if you got more work to do, you got to work to midnight. Well, that's crazy, right? So that's changed. So people have to, the flexibility piece is really important. It goes back to the culture of your company. Okay. So let's talk about this a little more. We're going to get through this. Okay, so this is an actual company example. There was one of my examples, a $50,000 base pay raise as an offer. And I'll walk you through that. It was one of the most extreme ones. But there was this large company, every single person that got a significant raise like that to leave the organization, it was a different job. It was clearly a different job. It wasn't the same job. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. This company, base pay market movement from last year. If you're not prepared, you don't have the information. You don't know. So we have been working for this company for 5 years. We know market movement every year. 104%. Again, over there, I was saying market movement generically was between 98 and 102%. You saw in that one slide this last year it was roughly 4%, right? And that correlated with this company overall. But we also were able to look at United States decline. This is market movement. This is market variance. Market variance inside the company is related to where the employees are versus the market, okay? So that's what a market variance is. So they were at 100%, so they were paying at market overall, but it dropped to 96.96%. So if they have a strategy of paying at market overall, then they should have an increased budget of 3.04% to maintain the market. But then you have to decide how much do we want to do is predict, and I have slides on that too. International, they were actually paying above the market, and they dropped to closer to the market. And there's a lot of history there. But finance and talent acquisition were the highest groups that drove this. Finance jobs have gone up dramatically on, I'm going to show you a slide, about 10% in the marketplace. So this is actual market variance movement. This isn't market movement for the job. This is market variance. So APS at the top, it's a consulting group. They were almost 105% of the market overall. This doesn't have the number of employees on it. And overall, they stayed above the market because this market rate did not change. Finance, when they were behind the market going in, so their employees were paid 10% below the market pay in the organization. And they dropped even further, okay? Because the market for finance moved dramatically. This is what I was telling you, Ken. If you look at business development group, they were way behind the market and moved even further. One of the biggest market movement this year was business development professionals. Not necessarily sales professionals. That moved about 4%. The people that were actually doing the hunting and the business development. I don't think marketing is on here. Marketing moved about, this shows marketing moved about 3%. So marketing didn't move at all, but this is marketing in corporate. We know marketing for marketing companies, like SEO people and everything, move dramatically because we have clients that do that.
That real estate is a big category. Which part of real estate? Is that commercial? Is it acquisition?
This is partly facilities.
Oh, it's facilities.
So this isn't industries, this is a company. This is going down the different functions in a company and showing you an example of how the market
So
moves.
there's zero movement there.
Yeah, there's no change. No change. That's what that means, is there was no change in the value in those jobs in the marketplace. Yep. And you saw international over there. And again, what was driving this was finance jobs. Tax jobs are big now. A lot more pay for tax professionals is going way up. This actually says people decreased, the market variance decreased, driven by talent acquisition. So talent acquisition jumped way up. It was about 15% increase in talent acquisition jobs. And then talent generation, which is the same as talent acquisition. This again is designed for a company. I didn't change it. I wanted to show you an example of what we do for our clients. Okay, so this is really important. Okay, so we hear that people are getting large increases, right? We hear that in the marketplace. And so this company adjusts its base pay ranges based on competitive market data for every job. This was the hiring during 2021. This actually goes all the way through January. But as you can see, a market variance is the person's pay divided by the 50th percentile of the market, the midpoint of the base pay range. So this organization, if you look at it, there was 87 hires. Yes, that's a lot of people hiring. They were actually growing, so they were adding, but people were leaving. What this means is that the average market variance of new hires was 98%. So they, on average, were paying people less than the market for new hire employees coming in the organization. So if somebody gets a raise for 30% increase, it's probably because they were way underpaid, right? But so now I'm hiring people, I am able to hire people within the competitive pay range that I've established for that job. That's what this is saying. So individual versus market is a big misnomer out there in the marketplace. So then you see, and then the distribution. This is consulting, business operations, corporate technology, revenue, talent, and then overall. You're seeing that even though it was average of 98.4, 39 are between 85 and 99, and 31 are between 100 and 110. And this is related to hiring people according to where they fit into the range. So if I'm recruiting and I find employees that are progressing, but I want to hire them because they're a top performing employee that I see a lot of growth in, I'm hiring them in here. If I have somebody that's fully successful and is going to do a job, really good job, really fast, I'm going to hire them higher in the range. And that's what we've trained our hiring managers and our talent acquisitions to do, is look at the person and their capabilities as best you can during the interviewing process to decide where you're making the offer. The big fear that HR people had when the company said you had to start paying the base pay range, giving the base pay range. Well, people all want to. Well, you got to pay me at the top then. Like, that's just fear. You've got to be able to tell people that we hire within the competitive base pay range based on our assessment of your current capabilities, right? I'm sure you have conversations like that.
Sure.
So
companies need to do a better job of scoping out the position.
Yeah.
Right.
From a job spec to the value of the organization to the mobility and career progression opportunities, all those things that come into that.
Right, and that's what the world is demanding now. If you want to retain your employees, you got to do that. I've been saying that, and Ken, I know you've been saying that as long as I have, and so people just don't get it, right? But now the world of work is demanding that you do it more. Okay, I wanted to share that. Okay, case studies. We have enough time.
About 5 minutes.
Oh, wow, Tim. Okay, so case studies, real quickly. I want to do the role play real quick. These are just case studies. You see them. I wanted to point out the person that got the $50,000 base pay raise by leaving. She went from a recruiter to a director of recruiting in a smaller company. And as you can see, they actually made a counteroffer. And you'll like this story. They wanted to make a counteroffer, which I thought was foolish because they actually asked me about it. And this is the HR team wanting to save this person. And they put the counteroffer up to the CEO, and the CEO said, "Are you out of your minds? That would be so detrimental to our culture." And I told them that was going to happen. So I wasn't surprised when the CEO, I know the CEO really well. So, and then you see it. She left for 6 months. Guess where she's back back at that company? She boomeranged back. She was one of the, said, I can do that job and they're going to hire me, so I'm going to go do it. Well, she didn't do it. So she's back in the organization. So you can see there's, these different scenarios that go through that. There is a lot of that out there. And a lot of times it's a new career opportunity, more so. And there is that problem of people for a long time haven't been paid right. So when they're leaving, they're getting large increases. I think, there's a million scenarios, but I think that's really part of what's a significant part of what's happening in the marketplace. And then the supply and demand, that's driving higher pay too. Okay, so we're gonna do a role play real quick, and Jack's gonna be my employee, and we're gonna kick this off. So there's the question.
All right. So, boss, I don't think my pay aligns to the market rate. Everyone I talk to that does what I do outside of here is making more money than me. So what are we benchmarking to as a company?
So 90% of managers are going to say, "Oh, I have no information. What do I do? How do I handle this situation?" If you don't have information, if you don't have a structure, the answer is, "I have no idea, Jack." So, hey, Jack, maybe you and I should go on pay scale and look at what the pay range is for your job and my job. I'm exaggerating here because if you don't have any information and if you're not prepared, you can't answer that question. You're as lost as the employee. But if you're prepared, the answer is, "Hey, Jack, we have the career track job structure. You are currently a software engineer. And by the way, you're doing a great job. As you know, we have that conversation all the time about your career progression. And, we have ranges that, I've shared with you in the past for your job. And it's based on, real data. A lot of times you might have friends that, make different than you and all that. But we really we really believe our data is correct, and we monitor it and adjust it on an ongoing basis. And so we believe the range is right. and we believe you're on track, to get a raise this year. And then, I want to keep working with you to get you to the next level and a promotion.
They have a ping pong table at this other place.
That's a good point. You and I, let's start spreading the this is an exaggeration, but let's talk about, how at our organization we can actually put some fun back into it here and get some space for stuff like ping pong and stuff like that. Because, it's really, you come here and it's dead. So and let's work together to kind of talk about that and help the company be successful.
Is there an opportunity, this other place, said if I needed to move, it's getting so expensive here in San Diego, and if I didn't move that I could work remotely, and right now I can't. So, is that going to be an opportunity here, or is that?
We're actually, the senior leaders in the organization are talking about our strategy around flexible work. So I don't have the answer today, but they are kind of leaning toward giving up people opportunity to move out of the high-priced areas. What they're really worried about is about how do we manage a remote workforce and how do we continue to engage them. But that's on our agenda for the future, and hopefully we have that resolved pretty soon and give you that opportunity.
Okay.
So that's part of the, again, we could go through hours and hours of role plays, but if you don't have a compensation structure or don't have data, how can you even have a conversation? And there's a lot of companies that are out there that can't have a conversation. We had, in closing, so, we've been working with this company for 5 years, and it's been a journey. And we started with moving them, the first 3 years was moving them from discretionary bonuses to real incentive plans. And then was the career track job structure and managers getting trained. So at this point, we've only trained the senior leaders in the organization on this model. And this year it needs to accelerate because of what's happening. And so managers in the past would say, when somebody would come and say, that question is, how are you benchmarking the job? They would say, hey, I went on PayScale, or I went on this free website, there's plenty of them out there now, and they say my job should be $150,000 and you guys are only paying me $125,000. And the manager would have no clue what to say. And so it's about building a transparent culture, and so you have that position. And with that, I will thank everybody for listening to me for the last hour.